cleansing of the temple provides a rare glimpse into the breadth of his emotions. We usually picture Jesus as kind and compassionate, welcoming children, cleansing lepers, attending to all who reached out to him. In this powerful scene in the temple courtyard, Jesus expresses a different kind of emotion. He acts out of violent anger, or as Dan Cole puts it, an outburst of rage. In Matthew's account of the story, two opposing emotions in Jesus, anger and compassion, are set side by side. After Jesus has physically cleared the temple of all who were selling and buying, after he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold doves, he once again shows his compassion. For Matthew tells us that the blind and the lame came to him in the temple and he cured them. This scene is profoundly significant. Those who previously were not allowed in the temple due to their physical impairments were the first ones to approach Jesus. All these events occur in and around the Jerusalem temple. But to understand Jesus' actions in the temple, we need some insight into the significance of the temple in the lives of people in Jesus' day. Dan Cole will discuss the building of the temple, its history and function.
And he entered Jerusalem and went into the temple. Not for the first time, of course. The Jerusalem temple stood at the very center of Jewish religious life, and Torah law prescribed that every able Jew was to come to the temple for at least the three major feasts of the year, the spring feasts of Passover and Pentecost, and the fall feast of Tabernacles or Booths. Devout Jews in Jerusalem would go to the temple at least weekly, but in addition to Sabbath and feast day ceremonies, the priests also conducted sacrifices and prayers twice every day. And at any time, day or night, individual Jews might be seen in the temple courts, offering up personal prayers of atonement or appeal or thanksgiving. Jews living farther away, such as in Galilee, would have attempted to make the trip to Jerusalem at least once a year, at Passover probably. John's Gospel reports Jesus going to Jerusalem during several feasts in the short period of his ministry. The Jerusalem temple had been the focus of Jewish religious life for 1,000 years before Jesus' time, ever since King Solomon first raised a temple where his father David had built an altar on the highest point of Jerusalem's mount, now marked by the golden-hued Muslim Dome of the Rock. Solomon's temple was built literally as a bayith, a house for Israel's God, a sacred space set apart as his dwelling place among his people. 4 centuries later, that first temple was destroyed by the Babylonians. When the exiles returned to Jerusalem from Babylon, they quickly built another temple on the same ground, for by that time, Jews believed that only in that place could they fully worship and sacrifice to their God. For the next 500 years, that second temple not only served Jews living in Jerusalem and the surrounding Holy Land, it also became the spiritual center and pilgrimage goal for the many Jews settled in other lands. When Herod the Great came to power under Roman patronage in 37 BC, he began an ambitious building program at the Temple Mount. Though his own motives were not noble, the results were truly impressive. He completely replaced the modest and aging temple structure with a grandiose and lavishly decorated new building. According to the Jewish historian Josephus's descriptions, the new temple was given a facade 170 feet high, faced with yellow, blue, and white marble, accented by gold plating and topped by a series of golden spikes along its parapet. The marble and gold of the temple reportedly gleamed so brightly in the sunlight that it provided a beacon for pilgrims miles away, a sight to rival the temples of Egypt and Greece and Rome. Herod also enlarged the formal courts in front of the temple, an outer court for women, an inner court that only male Jews could enter, and an area immediately in front of the temple's entrance which was reserved for attending priests. Access to the sacred space was thus increasingly restricted. The interior of Herod's temple, like its predecessors, was divided into 3 successive rooms. Selected priests could go into the first 2 rooms to attend the incense altar and lamps, but even the priests did not enter the final, innermost room, the Holy of Holies, the ultimate sacred space in the house of the Lord, reserved for the deity. Now, in contrast to temples of other religions, this room held no statue of a god. Biblical faith proclaimed that the God of Israel, who had made the heavens, could not be confined in a house, nor could he be defined by an image. In fact, a veil hung across the entrance to the Holy of Holies to keep it separated even from view. And only one man entered that room once a year, the high priest, on the Day of Atonement. Around the temple courts, Herod greatly expanded the outer precinct, extending it to the west, north, and even to the south, where the natural hill drops off sharply. Archaeological excavations since the 1960s outside the southern Temple Mount walls confirm that the lowermost courses of stone were in fact laid by Herod's engineers, who had to raise thick retaining walls more than 130 feet from bedrock to reach the temple level. Some of the massive blocks bonding the corners are 35 feet long and weigh 70 tons. Building the new temple was indeed a dramatic undertaking. This drawing combines information from the recent excavations with descriptions by Josephus and others to suggest what Herod's Temple Mount looked like at Jesus' time. Spread over 36 acres, it was half again larger than the Acropolis of Athens. It was accessible from all directions through elaborate gateways, on the west by a bridge, and on the south by tunneled stairways which rose from a broad stepped plaza to the courtyards high above the city streets. At the top of the massive retaining walls were column stoas, covered walkways along each side, framing the expanded outer precinct around the temple. Now imagine the scene during Passover week. Vendors' stalls crowding the outer precinct like a street market. Throngs of people jostling each other to haggle with merchants over the price of sacrificial lambs, arguing with money changers over the value of the Roman denarii or Greek drachmas they had to change into Jewish shekels for use at the temple. The expansive size of Herod's temple precinct probably increased the intrusion of other distracting activities. Pilgrims, desperately seeking lodging, being hounded by hawkers trying to rent space on the rooftops. Souvenir sellers and beggars and pickpockets, and even porters carrying heavy loads on their backs, pushing through the crowds to take a shortcut across the temple grounds. For pious Jews coming to the temple to pray or make offerings, the noise and confusion might have gone a long way toward dispelling the temple's aura of holiness. When Jesus came up to the Temple Mount, that scene sparked in him an outburst of rage. He certainly would have been offended by the crass commercialization and the absence of reverence on the part of so many. He probably did invoke Jeremiah's charge that God's house had become a den of robbers, and he also drew upon the words of Jeremiah, Isaiah, and other prophets to warn of God's impending judgment upon Jerusalem and the temple. Jerusalem was destroyed in AD 70, about 4 decades after Jesus' crucifixion. And Roman soldiers sacked and completely dismantled the temple. The sacred space was gone. The landscape of faith radically altered. The gospel writers, working in the decades following the fall of Jerusalem, look back in time across the rubble of that once sacred space as they re-examined the traditions concerning Jesus and tried to restate the meaning of his actions and words, indeed of his whole mission and his person. To the author of John's Gospel, it was clear that God was no longer to be sought in a once sacred space, but in a sacred being. Jesus answered them, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." He spoke of the temple of his body.
As he came near and saw the city, he wept over it, saying, "If you, even you, had only recognized on this day the things that make for peace. But now they are hidden from your eyes."
His disciples did not understand these things at first, but when Jesus was glorified, then they remembered that these things had been written of him and had been done to him.
The chief priests, the scribes, and the leaders of the people kept looking for a way to kill him, but they did not find anything they could do, for all the people were spellbound by what they heard.
Jesus answered them, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." After he was raised from the dead, his disciples remembered that he had said this.
Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Hosanna.